Hi everybody, and welcome back to AGS Stories. Today's post is from the subreddit Am I the A-hole, and it's by a user whose account has since been deleted. The question posed is, am I the A-hole for snapping back at my brother's fiancée for criticizing my parenting? This story dives into a family conflict where differing opinions on parenting styles lead to tension and harsh words. The narrator struggles with whether their reaction was justified or over the line. Let's break it down and figure out who, if anyone, is in the wrong here. My name is Emily, and I'm 37 years old. I'm a mother to 3 wonderful kids: Lucas, 12, Sophie, 9, and Ethan, 6. My husband Daniel, 38, and I have always prioritized giving our kids opportunities we never had. Growing up, I felt like I missed out on so much because my parents never encouraged extracurriculars or hobbies. I wanted better for my children. My younger brother Nathan, 31, recently married Megan, 28, after dating for a few years. While Megan and I have always gotten along on the surface, there's been an underlying tension between us for as long as I can remember. Megan has this habit of overstepping when it comes to my kids. She likes to think of herself as the cool aunt, which might sound harmless in theory, but in practice, it's exhausting. She undermines the rules Daniel and I set, like sneaking the kids dessert before dinner even when we've said no. She rolls her eyes at our parenting choices, joking that we're too strict, and loves to throw around backhanded comments about how uptight we are. I've bitten my tongue more times than I can count, but her behavior finally pushed me over the edge last weekend. We were at my parents' house for dinner, a rare evening where everyone in the family came together. The kids were excited, and as usual, they were chattering about their various activities. Lucas proudly shared how he plays soccer, practices piano, and takes karate lessons. Sophie talked animatedly about her dance classes, art projects, and swimming sessions. Even little Ethan joined in, talking about how much he loved basketball and singing. As I listened to my kids, I couldn't help but feel proud. They were happy and thriving. But then Megan, who had been sipping her wine and smirking, leaned back in her chair and said, "Wow, Emily, you keep them so busy. They're just kids. When do they ever get to relax?" I gave her a tight smile and responded evenly. We believe in teaching them good habits early. We want them to explore their interests and learn time management. It's important to give them a strong foundation. Daniel nodded and added, "And hey, it's great for their college applications someday." I thought that would be the end of it, but later when Lucas mentioned how much he'd studied for a recent math test, Megan piped up again. "It can't have been that serious," she said with a laugh. "You're only 12. You should tell your parents to let you be a kid." Something inside me snapped. I turned to her, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. "We want our kids to build habits that will help them succeed in life," I said. "If you want to raise your kids to fail someday, that's your choice." The room fell into a heavy silence. Megan's face turned bright red, and without another word, she stood up and stormed out of the room. Nathan quickly followed her, glaring at me as he went. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house. I could feel the weight of my parents' disapproval as they looked at me. My mom broke the silence, saying, "Emily, that was uncalled for. You know how sensitive Megan is about these things. You didn't have to take it so personally." Daniel, on the other hand, was furious. "She's been undermining us for years," he said, his voice low but angry. "She has no right to criticize our parenting, especially when she doesn't have kids of her own. Maybe now she'll think twice before giving us her unsolicited opinions." Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. I hadn't meant to insult Megan personally, and I certainly hadn't meant to imply that she was a failure. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to hear the truth. Her constant criticisms had worn me down, and I had finally reached my breaking point. Was I too harsh? Maybe. But was it justified? I wasn't so sure. Daniel and I have always done what we believe is best for our kids, and we've worked hard to give them opportunities that we never had. Megan doesn't see the late nights we spend helping with homework, or the effort it takes to coordinate their schedules. She only sees what she wants to see. The next step, I realized, would have to be a conversation with Megan, if she was even willing to have one. For now, though, I knew one thing for sure. My kids would always come first, no matter what anyone else thought. After the tense family dinner and the heated argument with Megan, I spent a lot of time reflecting on what had happened. While I felt justified in standing up for myself and my family, the way I addressed Megan wasn't ideal. I hadn't meant to insult her career or imply that she was a failure, but looking back, I could see how my words might have landed that way. The fallout from that night left me wondering, could I have handled things differently? Let's break this down into two key areas: Megan's behavior and my parenting style. First, Megan's actions. Regardless of her opinions, criticizing someone's parenting, especially in front of their kids, crosses a boundary. It undermines the authority of the parents and can confuse the children. If Megan had concerns, she could have approached me privately, but instead, she chose a public setting that escalated the tension. As for my parenting style, I know I've made choices that not everyone agrees with. And that's okay. My husband Daniel and I want to provide our children with opportunities we didn't have, but I realize now that it's worth reevaluating the balance in their schedules. While I believe in teaching my kids discipline and time management, I don't want to inadvertently pressure them or take away their ability to simply enjoy being kids. After sharing my story, the feedback I received from others gave me plenty to think about. Here are some of the most thoughtful responses. Balanced Views 23 says, Emily, I get it. Megan's behavior was frustrating and you were pushed to your limit. That said, your response probably felt like a personal attack to her, even if that wasn't your intention. I think setting clear, respectful boundaries with Megan moving forward could help prevent this kind of situation. It's okay to let her know that while you appreciate her interest in your kids, decisions about their upbringing are yours and Daniel's to make. Organized Chaos 88 says, Your kids' schedules sound exhausting just to read about. I understand wanting to give them the best start in life, but don't forget that downtime is just as valuable. Kids need time to be bored, to create their own fun, and to learn how to entertain themselves. I was an overscheduled kid, and when I got to college, I struggled to cope with unstructured time. I'd suggest building in some free time. It could make a big difference for their creativity and emotional well-being. Megan's delivery was definitely wrong, but she wasn't entirely off base. Kids thrive with balance. It's great that your children are excited about their activities, but it's worth checking in with them regularly to ensure they're genuinely enjoying what they're doing. They might be participating because they feel like they have to, even if they don't realize it yet. Keeping an open dialogue with them can prevent burnout and help them find the balance they need. Lessons learned for me: boundaries matter. I need to have a calm, private conversation with Megan to address what happened. While I appreciate her involvement in my children's lives, I also need to make it clear that comments about my parenting, especially in front of the kids, are not acceptable. Evaluate balance. While Daniel and I have the best intentions, this situation has made me question whether our kids' schedules leave enough room for unstructured time. I plan to talk with each of them to see how they feel and make adjustments if necessary. For Megan, respect goes both ways. Megan needs to learn that there's a time and place for expressing opinions. Criticizing my parenting in front of the kids undermines our authority and creates unnecessary tension. Address underlying issues. I now understand that some of Megan's comments stem from her own insecurities and experiences. Encouraging her to seek therapy or a safe outlet to process these feelings could help her let go of the resentment she's projecting onto our family. Looking back, this incident wasn't just about a parenting disagreement. It highlighted the importance of communication, balance, and empathy. Parenting is deeply personal, and while advice can be valuable, it must come from a place of respect. For Megan, it's about addressing her past and learning to navigate her emotions without projecting them onto others. For me, it's about maintaining balance, not just for my kids, but for myself as a mother. What about you? Have you ever faced a similar situation with a family member? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. After reflecting on everything that had been said, both by Megan and the online community, I decided it was time to reevaluate. My parenting approach had always been about giving my kids the opportunities I never had. I thought I was striking the right balance between structure and freedom, but the criticisms made me wonder, was I missing something? Could my kids feel overwhelmed or pressured without me realizing it? That night, I sat down with Daniel to discuss it. "Do you think their schedules are too much?" I asked hesitantly, the weight of uncertainty creeping into my voice. He looked up from his laptop, frowning slightly. "Honestly, no. The kids seem happy. They're thriving, Emily. But," he paused, considering his words carefully, "maybe it wouldn't hurt to check in with them. If nothing else, it shows them that their feelings matter." He was right. The next evening, after dinner, I called a family meeting. The kids settled onto the couch, their faces curious but unconcerned. Lucas, ever the responsible eldest, asked, "Are we in trouble?" I smiled. "No, not at all. I just wanted to talk to you guys about your activities and how you're feeling about them. Are you enjoying everything you're doing? Do you feel like it's too much?" Sophie tilted her head thoughtfully. "I like what I'm doing, but could I maybe switch art class to pottery? I think it would be more fun to make things I can use." "Of course," I said, jotting it down. "What about you, Lucas? Ethan?" Lucas shrugged. "I like everything, Mom. It's not too much for me." Ethan piped up with his usual enthusiasm. "I just want more time to play soccer with my friends after school." Hearing their responses was a relief. They were happy and content, though I made a mental note to be more proactive about giving them the freedom to explore different interests, or even take a break if they needed one. The next day, however, brought a new wrinkle to the situation. Megan texted me suggesting we meet for coffee. My first reaction was hesitation. Our last encounter had been anything but pleasant, and I wasn't sure I was ready for another confrontation. But then I reminded myself of the importance of resolving this tension, especially for the sake of family harmony. We met at a small cafe near her house. Megan arrived looking nervous, her usual confident demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. "Thanks for meeting me," she began, stirring her coffee absently. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at dinner, and after." I nodded, but didn't say anything, letting her continue. "You were right," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I've been projecting a lot of my own issues onto you and your kids. It's not fair, and I'm sorry." Her words caught me off guard. Megan wasn't someone who apologized easily. I took a deep breath and replied, "I appreciate that, and I'm sorry for the way I reacted. I shouldn't have said what I did. It was hurtful, and it wasn't my intention." For the first time, the conversation felt productive rather than combative. Megan opened up about her childhood, explaining how her parents had been dismissive of her interests and achievements. "They always compared me to my siblings," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "Fashion wasn't respectable enough for them, so when I see how much you invest in your kids, it brings back a lot of feelings." Her honesty disarmed me. For all her criticisms and oversteps, Megan was clearly carrying the weight of unresolved pain. "I'm sorry you went through that," I said softly. "But I think it's important for you to work through those feelings, Megan. Maybe with someone who can help you process them." She nodded. "I've been trying to find a therapist, but it's been challenging. I'll keep looking, though." We parted on better terms than we'd been in years, with a mutual understanding that boundaries were necessary and respect was non-negotiable. At home, I felt lighter, as if a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. I decided to continue making small adjustments to ensure my kids' schedules left room for creativity and rest. The following weekend, I planned an entirely unstructured day for the family, a day without any planned activities, where the kids could decide how to spend their time. The results were heartwarming. Sophie spent hours crafting miniature sculptures from clay she found in the art box. Lucas built an elaborate Lego city, and Ethan organized a backyard soccer game with the neighborhood kids. Watching them lose themselves in their imaginations reminded me of how important those boring moments are for growth. As the weeks went on, the changes began to ripple outward. Megan started attending family events with a more subdued attitude, refraining from her usual critical comments. I could tell she was trying, and for that I was grateful. Nathan even mentioned that she'd started therapy, which gave me hope that she was taking steps toward healing. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, Lucas came into the room. "Hey, Mom," he said, his tone unusually serious. "Yeah, sweetheart? I just wanted to say thanks for asking us about our activities. It's nice to know you care about what we think." His words hit me harder than I expected, filling me with both pride and a pang of guilt. Had I been so focused on doing what I thought was best for them that I'd forgotten to ask what they thought? "You're welcome," I said, pulling him into a hug. "And if you ever feel like things are too much, promise you'll tell me, okay?" He nodded, and I could see the sincerity in his eyes. Looking back, the conflict with Megan had been a wake-up call, not just about her behavior, but about my own. It reminded me to keep reevaluating what balance means for our family and to prioritize open communication, both with my kids and with those around me. Parenting isn't about perfection, it's about learning and adapting. And sometimes it takes an uncomfortable confrontation to bring those lessons to light. What started as a tense, emotional dinner had turned into an opportunity for growth, for my kids, for Megan, and for me. So now, let's move on to the update to see how this story ends. After our conversation, I left my brother's house feeling a mixture of relief and unease. While I was glad Megan had opened up about her past and the reasons behind her behavior, it didn't erase the tension or the lingering discomfort I felt about her fixation on my kids. Her vulnerability had been surprising, even moving, but it also made me realize how deeply her unresolved trauma had impacted her relationships. When I got home, Daniel was in the kitchen making dinner. The kids were playing outside, their laughter floating through the open window. I told him about my conversation with Megan, recounting her revelations about her childhood and her struggles with jealousy. "She admitted she's been projecting," I said, leaning against the counter. "And she's trying to find a therapist, but it's been tough for her. I want to be compassionate, but I also can't ignore how unhealthy this has been." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's good she's self-aware enough to admit all of that. But you're right. Until she gets professional help, we have to prioritize protecting the kids. Her intentions might not be malicious, but that doesn't mean her actions are harmless." We decided to stick to our plan of low contact for now. It wasn't an easy decision. Nathan was understanding, but visibly upset when I told him, and I couldn't help feeling guilty about the strain this would put on our family dynamic. That evening, after the kids had showered and settled in, Daniel and I called them into the living room for a family meeting. They sat cross-legged on the rug, looking curious but calm. "So," I began, "you know how Aunt Megan has been spending a lot of time with us lately. I wanted to talk to you about something that happened during our family dinner." Lucas raised an eyebrow, clearly picking up on the serious tone. Sophie glanced at Ethan, who was already squirming. "She and I had a disagreement," I continued, "and it made me realize that sometimes grown-ups need to work on themselves too. Aunt Megan is going through some things right now, and she's trying to figure out how to handle them. So, for a little while, she won't be around as much." Ethan's hand shot up. "Is she mad at us?" "No, sweetheart," I assured him. "She loves you very much. This isn't about you, it's about her. She needs some time to take care of herself, just like we sometimes take breaks when we're feeling overwhelmed." Lucas seemed to understand. "Is this about how she always says stuff about us being too busy?" I hesitated, not wanting to say too much. "Partly, but it's also about her learning how to handle her feelings in a way that doesn't hurt other people." Sophie, ever the empathetic one, said softly, "Maybe she's just sad. Can we help her?" Her question tugged at my heart. The best way we can help her is by giving her the space she needs to work on herself, and we can always let her know we care about her, even if we don't see her as much for now. In the weeks that followed, the transition to low contact was both easier and harder than I'd expected. Megan didn't reach out, which made me wonder if she was giving us space or simply retreating into herself. Nathan, however, called me frequently. "She's been quieter lately," he said during one of our conversations. "I think she's really trying to figure things out. She found a therapist who specializes in cultural family dynamics, so that's a step in the right direction." "That's great to hear," I said, genuinely relieved. I hope it helps her process everything. Meanwhile, I noticed subtle changes in the kids. Without Megan's presence and comments, they seemed freer, more relaxed. Lucas was less preoccupied with perfection in his extracurriculars. Sophie became more vocal about her preferences, and Ethan was still Ethan, happily running around with his friends and living in the moment. One evening, Lucas approached me while I was folding laundry. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "I think I want to quit karate." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. "Why's that?" "I just don't love it anymore. I'd rather focus on piano and soccer." I smiled, relieved that he felt comfortable enough to tell me. "That's completely fine, Lucas. I'm proud of you for knowing what you want." His shoulders relaxed, and he gave me a shy grin. "Thanks, Mom." Moments like this reminded me why balance was so important. Megan's criticisms may have been misguided, but they had forced me to reevaluate and ensure my kids always felt heard and supported. About a month later, Nathan called with unexpected news. "Megan wants to talk to you," he said cautiously. "Talk to me?" I asked, surprised. "She's been making progress in therapy and says she owes you an apology. She's ready to take responsibility for how she's been acting." The thought of seeing Megan again filled me with mixed emotions. Hope, anxiety, and a lingering apprehension, but I agreed. When Megan arrived at my house, she looked different, calmer, more grounded. She hesitated at the door before stepping inside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Thank you for meeting with me," she began. We sat down at the kitchen table and she took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize now how unfair I was to you. My comments about your parenting weren't about your kids. They were about me and my own issues. I let my insecurities and jealousy get the better of me, and I'm so sorry for that." Her words were sincere, and for the first time, I saw a version of Megan that wasn't trying to compete or criticize. "I appreciate that," I said. "And I'm sorry for how I reacted. I shouldn't have lashed out at you the way I did." We talked for nearly an hour, discussing her progress in therapy and her plans to rebuild healthier relationships. Not just with me, but with herself. Before she left, Megan turned to me and said, "I know I have a long way to go, but I hope one day I can be the kind of aunt your kids deserve." "You're already taking the first steps," I replied. "That's what matters." In the weeks following our conversation, Megan gradually started rejoining family events. She was more reserved, careful with her words, and visibly making an effort to respect boundaries. The kids were happy to see her again, and while I knew it would take time to fully rebuild trust, I felt optimistic about the future. The entire ordeal had taught me valuable lessons about communication, empathy, and the importance of self-awareness. It reminded me that everyone has their struggles, and while it's not an excuse for harmful behavior, understanding those struggles can lead to growth and healing. Most importantly, it reaffirmed my commitment to my family, to listening, adapting, and always putting my kids first. Thanks for sharing, Opie. Now, let's end this video with a fun and satisfying mood booster. This story comes from the subreddit Malicious Compliance and was shared by user Sticky Notes 23. It's a tale of justice served, one receipt at a time. I used to work at a hardware store about 7 years ago. We sold large gas bottles, 11 kilos or 24 pounds for those using Freedom units, of liquid petroleum gas. The deal was simple. If a customer brought in an empty bottle, we'd exchange it for a filled one for a set price. Here's how it worked. The customer would come to the checkout, tell us what they needed, pay for the exchange, and then take their proof of purchase, a receipt, to the loading station outside to pick up their filled bottle. By law, we had to offer every customer their receipt. Skipping this step could get the cashier fined, so it was a big deal. Most customers politely declined the receipt, and some would even drop it straight into the trash can near the checkout. It was annoying, but whatever, it came with the job. One day, in walks the villain of this story. A middle-aged man, the kind you instantly know is going to be difficult. He wanted to exchange his empty gas bottle for a full one. From the moment he approached the counter, he was dismissive and rude, barely acknowledging my existence. After I rang him up, I handed him his receipts. He sneered, crumpled them into a ball, and threw them at me while muttering, "I don't need this." The paper ball hit me square in the chest before dropping to the counter. I stared at it, stunned, while he grabbed his change and walked off. Now, working in customer service wasn't my dream job, and I'd dealt with my fair share of difficult customers, but no one had ever outright thrown trash at me. That was a first. Cue malicious compliance. I picked up the crumpled receipt ball, dropped it silently into the large trash bin behind the counter, and moved on to help the next customer in line. A few minutes later, the man came stomping back. He'd reached the loading station and realized he couldn't pick up his gas bottle without the receipt. With a forced smile, he said, "I need that receipt back." Still busy with the next customer, I kept my tone light and cheerful. "Sure, it's in the trash right here." I gestured to the bin beside me and stepped aside so he could retrieve it. Now, divine justice had worked its magic. The bin hadn't just been filled with regular trash, it was freshly loaded with gray dust from the recently cleaned floors, bits of old gum, and other unidentifiable grime. The man hesitated for a moment, then sighed and started digging through the bin. Watching him fish out the crumpled ball of paper he'd thrown at me, now coated in filth, was deeply satisfying. When he finally found it, he muttered something about people wasting his time, but his demeanor had changed. He was no longer the arrogant jerk who'd walked in. By the time he left, he was polite and even said, "Thank you." A small lesson in humility, courtesy of malicious compliance. User Random Sparks 22 says, "OP, I love how you handled this. You didn't escalate, and you stayed professional while still making him deal with the consequences of his own actions. Nothing like a little karmic justice to brighten the day." User GasKing101 says, "People who think customer service workers are beneath them deserve this kind of treatment. I used to work in retail, and the entitlement some people have is unreal. I'm glad you didn't let it slide. He needed to be reminded that basic respect goes both ways." User CleanSlate88 says, "This story made me laugh out loud. As a former cashier, I would have done the exact same thing. Customers like that think they can treat workers however they want, but sometimes a little dose of reality is exactly what they need. Well done, OP." User DustyHands42 says, "I'm dying at the image of this guy digging through a trash bin filled with floor dust and gum. Talk about poetic justice. It's amazing how quickly people change their tune when they need something from you." Takeaways. Respect matters. This story highlights why basic respect and decency are so important. It's a reminder that treating service workers poorly can backfire spectacularly. Professional karma. OP didn't yell, argue, or retaliate aggressively. Instead, they let the situation play out naturally, giving the customer a much-needed lesson in humility. The power of malicious compliance. Sometimes the best way to deal with a difficult person is to follow the rules, just with a little extra flair. That's it for today's story. If you enjoyed this tale of retail revenge, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your own stories in the comments. And if you've ever had a moment of satisfying malicious compliance, let us know below. We'd love to hear about it. Until next time, take care.